Hey y'all, welcome to What Could Go Wrong. Happy Wednesday. Today we're talking about anxious to confident. So there's so many things that are important inside of that conversation, and we're talking about it specifically today in our relationship with kiddos in our lives. So students or our own children and what that conversation looks like. So I'm joined by Christian, who has a last name that I practiced and now I'm no longer going to try, to talk about all this. Hey,
Well,
Christian,
hello.
what's up?
Hey, Chelsea. Good to
I
see
was
you.
like, I'm going to say your last name. And then I was like,
Oh,
no,
come
I
on.
give up.
Do it.
So you tell me, how does it go?
Vinceneux.
Vinceneux.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. See, you got it. You got it.
I got it.
Nothing could possibly go.
Well, nothing. I mean, when you have a show called What Could Go Wrong, I always try to warn people, like, I'm just letting you know. We're kind of setting a precedent for things will happen. So,
Yes, that's good.
well, tell us about you. What do you do? How'd you end up here hanging out with me on this random show?
Well, I don't even know how we connected, but I started posting on LinkedIn about 3 months ago, so it's still pretty recent. And I think I started noticing your posts. I had been curating my feed to get into topics like mental health and parenting and education,
Mm-hmm.
and because those are all topics I care about.
Yeah.
And then so you popped into my feed, and I remember starting seeing your content, and I thought, oh, this is someone I want to interact with. And
Yeah.
so I can't remember who requested who, and but we connected, and then at some point you asked me if I could be if I'd be interested in speaking on this podcast. So
Yeah.
here we are. Here I am. And
Yeah. And
this is quite a historical moment, and you may not be aware of that
I'm not aware why.
because this is my first podcast ever.
Woohoo!
So all dogs can.
Yay! Well, that's exciting. I'm excited to be your first podcast.
Thank
I mean,
you.
we'll start with the best. So, I mean, that's
I'm super excited.
so yeah, it was the same. Like I started seeing your content and I loved what you were talking about in, empowering the parent and what it looks like to be an anxious parent. Hello, anxious parent. And those types of things. And I was drawn to you inside of that. And so I was like, yeah, he needs to come and talk about these things with me and to other people. So like, tell us what you do.
Well, I'm a parent coach, so that's the short version, and I tend to work with parents who are anxious, who are overwhelmed, who are stressed, and who
So all of us.
right, and who are trying to find ways to make things a little bit easier. So sometimes my work focuses on very specific issues with the child. So it may start with maybe a child who has a lot of behavior issues, where there are a lot of power struggles, where there the child who doesn't want to go to bed or doesn't want to get ready in the morning to go to school, and those types of things. And at times it's more on the parent side, where they're wanting to understand more how to create some more life work balance, how to not be so irritated, not snap at their kids because they realize that, okay, I know I'm a good parent and this is the last thing I want to do, and I don't want to be that kind of parent, but I just one thing leads to another. I come home from work and sometimes I just can't control myself, and I just snap at my kids, and I just hate myself for after that. And every day I want to try to do better, and it's just not working. So so I have a lot of situations like that, and sometimes the solutions tend to be more child focused, and sometimes it's more parent focused. So there's a little bit of everything. But what I love the most about my work, or one of the aspects I love the most, because I love so much about it, that it's how, in the process of understanding how to support their children better, parents find ways to understand themselves better.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I think parents are often so there's so much going on that there's often this sense of, well, my kids first, and
Mm-hmm.
and I'll get to me when I can, when there's time, but there's
Yeah.
never time.
Which is never.
I know, it's never. And what you get out of that is a lot of burnout, a lot of depletion, a lot of putting your needs on hold as a parent,
Mm-hmm.
so whenever that process starts happening, when in the process of understanding how they can support their children better, they start realizing, oh wait, I'm doing this because of this, or I'm doing this
Yeah.
because so that's always
Yeah, we've talked about things like that. When you start shifting from behavior management to relationship, it starts to kind of shift that focus, because in behavior management, you're like, I have to manage your behavior. And in relationship, it's you're switching back to that collaborative approach. So it does really require and also allow you to see yourself a little bit more in those interactions. And so I love that. It's a great shift. And Julie said, yeah, kind of the same thing, that understanding kids better leads to better understanding of ourselves. I think that's kind of true with every relationship that we put intentional effort into, is we end up understanding more about ourselves through that process. But what better way to do that, or what more valuable relationship do we have than that of, with our kids, to pour into it like that?
right. I agree.
So, I mean, what I glean from that is that you are a parent coach for every single parent on the planet, because we all need these things in some way or another. And then once we figure it out, and then, they turn the next stage and we're like, yeah, I got nothing.
What's, I often talk to parents, because I think often the mindset is, how am I going to do this? It means that, I'm not doing enough, or I'm doing something wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
how am I possibly going to add something more to do? And it's just,
Yeah.
my mindset is always that you're not going to have to do more. You're going to do it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in a way where you're going to start noticing things, you're going to understand your child's intentions better. You're going to start understanding what's behind the behavior. Like you mentioned, it's not about just behavior management and putting a band-aid on the behavior, but more understanding what's causing that behavior, what's contributing to it. Is it, is the child thirsty? Are they tired? Are they scared? Are they anxious? Are they angry? Are they really excited? And is that what's causing the behavior? And once we start doing that, we can actually learn so much from it and eliminate or reduce a lot of those behavior problems. So it's not so much about, again, doing more, but doing it differently.
Right. Yeah. And that's a conversation when I do trainings with educators. We talk, a lot of my trainings are along the line of like trauma informed, which we're going to talk a little bit more about emotional safety. And when you start having that conversation, educators in general are already like, I already have to do these 275 things. If you ask me to do one more thing, there's no way. And I think what you said is right on the money. So often we're not adding another thing that you have to do. We're rather almost replacing something that's not really serving you very well. What can you take away and replace with this, like a replacement behavior, most often, rather than just let's keep stacking things on top? Because sooner or later you have to unlearn something and remove it from your repertoire before you can really make progress.
Absolutely.
So some of the things that we wanted to touch on today, as we're kind of reviewing this whole anxious to confident concept, was what does it even look like to create a safe emotional space? It was just huge for me. Love that in all aspects of everything. And other ways, that other terms you might have heard for that would be like, what does it mean to create psychological safety, or trauma-informed space, emotional safety? All those kind of mean the same thing. And then how can you remove self-judgment and shame? So let me know that'd be great. And then how can you support your child without putting your needs on permanent hold, which you touched on that just a little bit. But I think those are big questions that I really want to dig into with you. And before we dig into that, I forgot to ask you to mention a little bit about your background and how you ended up here, because you have some cool jobs that kind of led you to this place, or career paths?
Okay. All right. I get very excited when I talk about my work. So if I get sidetracked, which happens, just rein me in.
Perfect. I love excitement. Let's do it.
Well, I think, so my background professionally, I started out as an occupational therapist. So I was first in business school, and then halfway through the year I just realized that I was bored, and I was not connecting to my classes, not connecting to teachers, and I thought, what is wrong with me? And I realized, I thought, this was like pre-internet, and so it was a lot harder to do research, but the big question was, what do I want to do when I grow up? Because I thought this was after high school, I know that I'm supposed to do what
something just clicks.
So
and you magically know.
I should be excited every day, right? And I'm not.
Yeah,
so what's wrong with me? And then the big thought was, I want to help people. As vague as it was, as broad as it was. And so I'll fast forward, but I basically decided to go for an occupational therapy major, and I trained as an occupational therapist, and that was back in France, in Paris. And then I worked as an occupational therapist for over 30 years. And it was just an amazing career. I can't imagine what else my life would have been, or what I would have become without that, because it added so much to my life. And so what was quite amazing as an occupational therapist is that I got to work with kids. It was mostly in mental health and with children. So children who had neurodevelopmental issues like ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, sensory processing disorders, with those, and not so much physical disabilities. And so what happened, the common denominator is that a lot of the children I worked with were extremely sensitive to all sorts of things, and had it was harder for them to learn the way that everybody wanted them to learn. They were perfectly able to learn, but not always the traditional way. So there were a lot of tantrums, a lot of behavior issues. So the parents often didn't know why. They just knew that, well, my kid is refusing to go to school. There are lots of tantrums. There's we have tantrums at home, and we have such a hard time making our child happy and comfortable, and we just don't know what can work. We're trying everything. So I worked with pretty severe, pretty intense behavior issues. And I think what it did is that it really trained me to always think outside the box, and always look at, people have tried 20 different things that have not worked. What else am I going to find something? And I usually did. And that was the exciting part, to feel that, okay, we can find ways to help this child learn better, and feel better about themselves, understand their own needs, advocate for their own needs, find ways for the kids, even nonverbal kids, to express themselves. And also the big piece was, as I worked as an occupational therapist, the traditional model was work with the child, and then have the parents keep bringing the child in session after session. And then the last 5 minutes of the session said, okay, good job, did great, see you next week. And then there was this nagging feeling that kept coming back, where I realized that the parents were really left out of the equation, and they were, and no one was talking to those parents. I mean, it was, it was all done with good intentions, but it was, nobody knew really, well, is this therapy working for the child? Is this working for the whole family?
And connecting all those pieces of a child's life into one big holistic experience.
Exactly. And you can't help a child in a vacuum, it hasn't. And then, more and more, the nagging feeling was that, okay, it doesn't matter how good I am during that session, I'm really, really helping this child, but what happens during the other 7 days, or throughout the day, throughout the evening, where the parents have an influence on this child? How can I support the parents, support their child? So I started focusing more and more on including the parents in the sessions, which at the time was pretty revolutionary, and parents would really look at me and said, you mean you want me to be in the sessions? And I'm like, I really want to be in sessions. They said, well, all of the other providers have said that we're not allowed to do that. So
not just not invited, but not allowed.
not allowed. And so so I learned a lot from including parents in the sessions, and I would, parents would join in the activities, and I would coach them through the sessions of saying, okay, this is why things work, this is why things didn't work, try this next week, try to incorporate this concept. And so people started calling me as, a coach, a consultant, and more my work shifted to working with parents as opposed to just children. And there was a point where I wanted more. And I felt like the profession of occupational therapy, although it had served me so well, was getting too small for me.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to expand. So that's 3 years ago, I made the switch and officially decided to start as a parent coach and kind of like repackage all of my experience and knowledge and so that's where I am today.
Well, I mean, you just kind of jumped off the cliff, because why not? What could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly, right?
You might as well. And I love what you said about, that I'm trying to think of like that career path, or I guess that title started to become too small. And I experienced something similar in what I was doing when I was working in schools. And it is kind of an interesting thing when it starts to feel like, when you first start it, you're like, this is everything. This is an amazing role. This is going to sustain me forever and ever and ever and ever. And then you get to a point where you start to kind of follow your niche inside of your niche and, start taking on those pieces. And I love seeing that happen with people, because it is scary, but it's always leads to like these really cool things, these like cool people who are doing really cool things that they're really passionate about on purpose. And that's it's a whole world changing event right there. So kudos to you for taking that leap. So let's jump into emotional safety, because, I could do a whole lecture on that, but tell us, what does that mean? And like, how do we go about creating that for our students or our kids?
Well, this is a huge Pandora's box, right? Because there's so many pieces to it, and there's so many ways to approach it. So I'm definitely not claiming to have the ultimate answer, but I have my own answers to it. But before jumping right into it, I want to share that on a personal level, I grew up in a space where my parents were loving and they were dedicated and they were responsible, and there was a lot of stability in the home. But in terms of emotional awareness and ability to express emotions, things were not always great. So my mom was extremely anxious, and so the way she manage her anxiety, and of course she didn't know at the time, because people didn't talk a lot about this kind of stuff, so it's not like I'm blaming her or about
right.
Her anxiety was she made sure that everybody was happy all the time. And so if I started crying or expressing anger or disappointment, the response was, oh, don't do that, that's going to make me too sad. And so I learned that expressing certain emotion was wrong. And I learned that expressing certain emotion was really going to affect the people that I care the most about. So it wired my brain to really compartmentalize things and dismiss things and put all those emotions in a little box. And of course, when you do that from the beginning, you don't even know you're doing it.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And so what happened is, as a young adult, I had no idea that how much I had learned to suppress my emotions and how hard it was to just even be in touch with my emotions. And my dad was also what I consider a highly sensitive person, HSP. So again, that label didn't exist at the time, but he had a lot of sensory issues. He had a lot of, he didn't like noise. He didn't like the wind when we went outside. He didn't like, a lot of sudden transitions, unexpected changes. And so it's, what it did is that, I knew it helped me, it got me really good at tuning into other people's state, emotional state, and physiological state, and but at the detriment of my own. So it got me really good. It really set me up to to work with kids and parents as an occupational therapist, as a coach, because I remember the first time I started working with kids with autism, parents would say, well, we don't know what they're feeling. We don't know what my daughter is feeling. And I could tell pretty much without knowing the child what the child needed. I said, well, he's scared. No, right now he's getting interested. They said, well, how do you know? I don't know. I just can feel it. But then, I had to realize, so I had to, throughout the years, I had to really unpack what I grew up with. And that process really helped me to be even more present in my work and help my clients, because it allowed me to tap into my own experience and realize all the reactions, the thought patterns, the behaviors that I had developed as a result of not feeling safe to express my emotions, of feeling judged. So there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of, my mom was very loving, but she was also very critical, probably because of her own background, on the way she grew up, and her anxiety about not being a good enough parent, so what came down is feeling, okay, I have to be a certain way, and I can't express myself. So that's often one of the first things that I work on with my clients, and because as a way to this is where really there's a very strong overlap between helping kids to feel emotionally safe and for parents to realize, how do they communicate and how do they feel safe themselves to express their own emotions? Because it's often for the average person doesn't think about all this stuff.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, what do you mean I feel safe? Yeah, I feel safe. I feel, let's focus on what needs to be done. So often through this work, the parents often realize how much they judge themselves, how much they blame themselves for not doing enough, for not being good enough, for I posted something this morning on LinkedIn where it was about quirks, and it was about
I saw that. Yes,
labor was more it was lighter, but it was also looking at how we judge ourselves for our quirks. We often apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. I know this is weird. I worked with, for years with people who had a lot of quirks because of sensory preferences. People who didn't like sounds or smells or certain textures or certain, and my work was always about, we can't approach it from, oh, it's weird, or that needs to change, or we need to fix it, because that's part of who that person is.
Yeah. So, how can you experience it without putting a label on it?
Exactly. So something as simple as having conversations, a family conversation with, obviously depending on the age of the child, but let's look at, what kind of foods do we like as a family? Dad loves, one parent loves broccoli. Oh, the other one hates broccoli. Okay. Well, what about, strawberries? Oh, we love strawberries. Oh, we don't like strawberries. Oh, well, thanks for sharing that, because, wow, isn't it interesting how we all live together? We all love each other, but we all have different preferences, as opposed to, how couldn't you like strawberries? They're good for you. Right. So, again, depending on the age of the child, it's something we want to start very, very young as possible, but really look at for ways to not judge, and ways to encourage expression of preferences, of likes and dislikes, and there's so many things that we do without realizing that we're doing it, and that can imply judgment. Sometimes a child may do something and we may laugh. They may a young child may be building a tower with Legos, with blocks, and it falls down, and we laugh. But how do they feel about it in the moment?
Right. Yeah.
And for some kids, it's a non-issue. They're going to laugh at it too, or maybe because it was funny in the first place. But for some children may start internalizing it as, oh, I'm not supposed to, I have to do better. I have to do better at building my tower because otherwise people are going to make fun of me. And so it's really, looking at our communication, our actions, what can we do to encourage kids to share their emotions, and there's a big push in our society to be positive, to be positive.
Yeah, the toxic positivity counterculture of that. Yes.
So, people will say, oh, there's never enough positivity. Well, it's not that we don't want to be positive, but if we over focus on being positive, then we're not leaving space for all the other uncomfortable emotions. And the human brain is wired to have all of those emotions. The human brain is wired to feel joy and fun and as much as to feel anger and jealousy and sadness and frustration. So if the child doesn't feel comfortable, if they feel like there's pressure to not show anger, not show sadness, then what are they going to do with those emotions?
Yeah.
And how is it going to show up? Because it never goes away.
Right. They don't just disappear.
It never goes away. It goes away from the surface, but then it rechannels itself into something else, into a behavior, into or into decreased self-esteem or lack of confidence, or so finding ways to encourage kids to verbalize their emotions and not approaching it as, oh, but you shouldn't feel angry, or but don't feel sad. It's going to be better tomorrow. I've been creating those little videos in the past few weeks. Those 90 seconds videos where 90 seconds encapsulate as much as I can. But it's on anxiety, but it applies also with other emotions, where if a child is expressing that they're anxious, of course, we want to give them a message of hope that things are not going to be like that all the time, and that there's ways to be better. But if we jump too quickly to the solution, it really invalidates the child's experience. Tell them, oh no, there's no reason to be so anxious or so mad at it. It's really not that big of a deal. It'll be fine. You'll be fine tomorrow.
Yeah.
Really teaches the child to distrust their own emotions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So they say, I guess I shouldn't feel this way. I guess I'm wrong, which can really mess up.
My favorite thing to say is feelings are for feeling and they're not forever. So it's kind of, we're going to validate this experience, and then we're also going to provide hope that this isn't forever. And I think a good movie that really introduced this concept pretty well was Inside Out. Did you ever see that movie?
Yes.
With all the little, and I mean the basis of the movie was this girl was being told to be happy, to be happy, to be happy, to be happy, and then was having all these other emotions, but wanted to be happy so her parents would feel supported and loved, and all of that, because she was the happy kid, and then she was able to embrace sadness and all those other things, and it was a beautiful movie and I loved it. It was lovely. But that's a real thing, is like you were saying, we were made to feel a myriad of emotions, not just happiness, and to remove those labels from emotions. It's not that to be angry is bad and to be happy is good, but rather we feel angry sometimes and we feel happy sometimes. And it's about, what do we do next with that? That's really important. I think that shift in mindset and then in conversation and response with a child is small, but also huge, right? If you say, don't feel that way, it's okay, is one of the worst things. It's okay, right? That small shift to validate first, and then, do something else.
Yes, no, absolutely. And, I often encourage parents, adults to go back to their own experience. How does it feel when if we're expressing a struggle with work, a struggle with a friend, a struggle with a family member, with anything, and then that particular person that we're talking with says, oh, but just you have so many blessings, just be grateful. It's going to get better. And it's like, how do you feel when that happens?
And not great.
It doesn't feel great. So I always remember, sometime last year during the thick of the pandemic, or during the beginning of the pandemic, and I was pretty affected by it. And then my father had just passed away, and it was just a lot going on. And so this friend came over, and because I have a history of not always of being used to not showing my emotions, I consciously make an effort when I'm not feeling great to be a little more real. And so I opened the door, and and she say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I say, "Well, it's been a tough week." And she say, "Oh, well, I guess today's a beautiful day." So, and I just felt completely invalidated. I thought, okay, she
Yes.
want to go there. She can't take that kind of
Yeah.
emotions. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I often encourage parents to, just to gauge with themselves and to reflect on how they feel with a certain type of interaction, so that they can pull from that to
Yeah.
interact with their child.
Validation is a game changer. I mean, when I'm talking about trauma-informed spaces with educators, we go into schools and talk about shifting kind of the whole school culture and common language into creating this trauma-informed space. And like, I'm like, listen, you don't need me here for 3 days. All you need to do is start validating and you're done. Like, that's kind of my spiel. Like, there's validation. And I was introduced to this concept of the balloon technique, where you see like the child as a balloon, and every like anxious thought or frustration is helium lifting it up. And before long, they're up here all wound up, and you're down here, and you're trying to get on their level. And most often what we do is we think, oh, well, they're up high, we need to get them to our level. So we just go and just pop the balloon with something like, you're okay, it's fine, don't worry about it, all those types of things, or it's a beautiful day, those types of things, invalidating statements, no matter how the good intention behind them. But when you pop something that's up high, it hits the ground hard, and then they're frustrated and you haven't really overcome it and you're not really sure what's going on. And so the alternative to that, we talk about validate to dissipate. So every validation up to that child dissipates a little bit of that helium, a little bit of that helium, a little bit of that helium before they're down there with you. And so if you just say simple things like, I see you, I hear you, I have felt that way, in this situation, or I completely understand how that could feel frustrating to you, or it looks like you feel sad, right? And every validating statement just pulls them a little bit closer before you can really engage with them. But thinking of it like that, like validate first, and then everything else can come after that. But they can't even respond when they're stuck in their downstairs brain, their amygdala, their emotional response anyway. So you're going to get zero logic.
No, that's so true. Those are great. Validate to dissipate. I love that.
But yeah, it's a good to remember it. Sometimes I'm teaching and I forget the word. I'm like, validate to something. It'll come to me. I think anticipate. But I think that's kind of the basis for emotional safety, is being able to share without that judgment or invalidation, even if it's unintentional. Just almost the allowance for, bad feelings or bad things to be said and to be shared is really the foundation for emotional safety. Do you feel like that kind of outlines that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I often find myself talking about this importance of creating space, of creating a safe space. And, we can't create that safe space if we're rushing. So
Yeah.
I think, the variable of time is a huge one for parents, because who has time these days? Nobody has time. We're always rushing. So that's the dilemma, right? But often what happens is we rush to solve a problem. We rush to identify a solution. We say, well, okay, so I'm going to validate. I can tell you're feeling anxious. Okay, well, let's go take a bath because that's going to make you feel better. Okay, let's go for a walk because that always makes you feel better. It's good exercise. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong. It's absolutely correct. Exercise, all sorts of things will help the child to feel better. But we need to allow for time.
Yeah.
And there is no guideline, because for a certain situation, for a certain child, that time could be 1 minute. Just validating them, and then boom, that's just enough of a little boost of validation to get back on track. And for some children, it's going to be hours.
Yeah.
And so we have, and often parents experience feeling anxious, because I think most of the time it comes from not wanting to see your child suffer.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it comes from a good place.
Of course. So, and especially if you know from your own experience, if you know what is going to help your child, why wouldn't you suggest it right away, immediately?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I'm going to fix it. Here, I can fix this for you. This is how we fix it.
But what we need to acknowledge is by rushing a little too quickly and not creating enough space where it becomes a counterproductive process. So allowing for enough time, and just, allowing, and often when I coach parents, I say, okay, I will encourage parents to really feel whatever they're feeling. Say, okay, you're going to validate. You're going to say, what are you going to say? So I often focus on giving them the language that they would be comfortable using.
Right.
And say, okay, so then what do? Then you do nothing.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
How hard it feels to just sit there and say, for example, tell your child, say, I know, I can tell you're having a hard time right now. And you pause and you're quiet and you sit there. And you say, I know this has been a hard day for you. And you get quiet and you sit there and you wait for a little cue from your child to see, well, how they responding to that? How they, are they still crying? Are they still upset? Are they still angry? Are they still, and little by little, you just create, you keep giving more time. And that time really is one big component to me for creating that emotional safety, and that eventually will allow the child to become open to either finding their own solutions or accepting solutions from someone else.
I think that it opens up this opportunity for so many different pieces to play into it, like you were saying, right? By giving them time to feel that feeling. One, it's hard to sit in a negative emotion. It's hard to sit in your anger, and then figure out, okay, how does this feel in my body? What am I going to do with this next? Right? That self-awareness, that comes from practice, and it's hard. And a lot of times, like you were saying, we're trying to get them through that emotion to the next thing because we don't want to see them there. Like it sucks for us. We know it sucks for them, and we can fix it. Right? And so allowing them to kind of sit in that emotion is not bad. You're allowing them the opportunity to really feel it in their body. And then when they feel ready to get out of it, either they're going to come to you and express that in some way and offer, can you help me? And however that looks like, or they're going to create a solution themselves. So you're giving them an opportunity to feel it and then to solve it, which is a beautiful thing, really. Because if you think of how many adults don't feel their feelings and then don't solve their own problems, so it's hard to sit in that space, but it really is immensely valuable.
No, absolutely. And it's, I always look for parallels between what we're asking the child to do compared to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And because, how do we manage our own stress? What do we show children by the way that we're managing stress? So, to me, in the example we're talking about, when a child is, let's say, really upset about something or anxious, and if we rush to the solution with the best intentions, we're really being a little more reactive.
Yes. Yeah.
We're being more impulsive. So, and when you start looking at the difference between, reacting and responding, and responding is more about, the basic mindful parenting, and when you so we don't want the child to react. We say, oh, you don't need to be angry, you don't need, it's not that bad, it's so we're bothered by their reaction. We want them to be calm about it, but we're jumping in, and if we jump in too soon and suggest a solution, we're also reacting.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a matter of slowing the process down and slowing ourselves down and looking at, okay, even as a parent, how's your breathing in the moment?
Right. How are you modeling the behavior?
Yes. What's your body doing? Are you standing from a distance, towering over the child, and so how can you become more aware, more tuned into what's going on with your own thoughts, with your own, how you feeling about this? Are you feeling, how anxious are you feeling about your child being anxious?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question that sometimes you don't want to ask in the moment. And back to we want to fix it for them because we can fix it for them. When I have this conversation with a group of educators, a lot of times when I first present it, they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would I let them be angry? I can help them fix that problem. I know how to fix that for them. And I'm like, well, it makes sense. I mean, in part, that's your role as an educator, is to help them solve problems, right? But let's stick that in another scenario. Think about, you've had a really hard day. People have been in your way. You're frustrated. Work was hard, whatever. You come home to your partner and you want to vent, and you vent, this happened, that happened, I can't believe this happened. What would you rather your partner say? Wow, I hear you, that really sucks. Or if you would have done this, this, and this, then those problems would have been fixed, right? And they're immediately like, oh no, that is absolutely not. They know not to say that. I'm like, okay, well, how does that play into, just because someone can fix it for you doesn't mean that necessarily has to be the path that it goes down. And you can kind of see this little light bulb, like, oh man.
I know. No, it's a super interesting process when you start pulling it apart and looking at the dynamics and
yeah, it is. And so I think that kind of guides us into some pieces that we've already talked about in removing judgment and shame. I mean, that's very closely tied to emotional safety. But if you were to kind of pick out some pieces from how do we remove judgment and shame, what would be your things that you would, what little tidbits of loveliness do you have to share around that?
Well, I think, the first thing is I'm always cautious in my work, how I approach my work, how I approach my clients, because at times what happens is parents coming to me with already a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
Of I'm not a good parent. I'm not doing enough. So,
are there parents that don't have guilt? Do they exist?
They're the ones that I don't know. They don't come to me.
Yeah, I've never met them.
But so, some of my work is spent on making sure that also I don't come across as blaming the parents for doing whatever they're doing, because we've all grown up with whatever we've grown up with.
You're modeling the behavior so they can model the behavior to model the behavior.
Exactly. And it takes a lot of awareness, a lot of reflection to be able to tease out, well, what did I get from my own upbringing? And which part do I like? Which part don't I like? And in terms of values, in terms of behaviors, and for the most part, that's not something that our society talks a lot about. I mean, we talk about it casually, but we don't study it. We don't. And so there's still things that I'm, now that decades later, that I'm still unpacking and say, oh yeah, I'm doing this because that's the dynamic I grew up with. So. When I started working as a therapist, I tended to be in judgment mode, and fortunately, because there was some supervision involved from the beginning, my supervisor, my mentors would point out and say, okay, that's you're trying to fix things too quickly, or this is coming across as like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that, and
we don't even recognize these behaviors, like until someone says, you're like, what are you talking about?
So my first thing is to, help parents to really self-reflect and look at, what are they bringing to the equation? What's their communication style with their child? What are their reactions, their own anxiety, but not from a place of, oh, you'd better change that soon. But from a curious point, from an inquisitive point. Let's, I'm going to be there with you to help you learn about yourself so that you make that process a little smoother and work better, and so really working on removing that shame and that guilt from the beginning, and then through language. So some of that is being intentional and being more reflective and building up that self-awareness. But the other part is when communicating directly with children is to because children internalize that shame really quickly. Yeah. Depending on who they're around or friends.
And then we label that resilience, which is a whole nother conversation, but go ahead.
Yeah. But it's, kids feel guilty for wearing glasses. They feel guilty for, being overweight, for being too skinny, for not being good enough with math or with sports or with, and they make excuses and they feel bad about themselves. And so it's really, when those are present issues, I always work with parents on how to how to change the language and how to specifically target that. So, with things along the lines of, well, let's really have discussions about how everybody is different. And how being different is not good or bad. It just is.
Right. Yeah, it just is.
We all have different fingerprints,
Right.
And so, somebody might be great at sports and they may be terrible with math, and it may be the other way around. It may be, and there's always going to be something. So coming more from a place of embracing differences,
right.
to so that can be a step in the direction of helping kids to kind of like get rid of shame and feeling more.
So much of all of these concepts that we've been discussing, before we jump into kind of the last big point that we wanted to touch on, was how we can support our child without putting our needs on permanent hold, which I think is a big one that you'll be amazing to kind of speak to. But I think so much of what we've already talked about, emotional safety and judgment and all of that, comes back to language. I mean, when I do trauma-informed spaces in schools, our biggest focus is choosing a common language. And then we also make intentional decisions. These are phrases we will not say. These don't fit inside of our culture. These are things we will say. Here's the intention. Here's the impact. And really reflecting on, and it's hard and it's intentional and it's all the darn time, because you have things that you say that you have no idea come across the way that they come across until you're really being aware and you're like, oh, that's probably not a good one. And so I do a training called Words Kids Need to Hear. And we talk about this, like shifting. We don't say this anymore. Like, it's okay. Here's why we don't say that, and what we should say. And one of the things that was big, or is big, in early education, and I used it all the time when I first started teaching, was you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. And I was like, here's something you don't need to say. And teachers are like, no, I use that all the time. I need that. That's very important, right? Until you point out, are you telling them that, because then I say, why is that valuable? And they're like, well, because it's teaching gratefulness. It's teaching to, have a thankful heart and these types of things. Like, that's can be 100% true. But is it also saying that you're not allowed to feel the emotion of a fit, right? Or that feeling a negative emotion is a fit, which is inherently bad or frowned upon, right? And they're like, and then we kind of break into, how can you shift that? And why aren't they allowed to feel that way? Can they feel that way and still engage in a happy or in a healthy manner, right? And I think that's what's so valuable about having people like you who are now having this conversation is, we don't know what we don't know. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And until someone starts asking questions or maybe having these conversations, nothing will really shift. And language is such an important part of that, but we use it all day, every day. And we've used it for however many years we've been alive. And we say, our grandparents said what our parents said, what the other people, we heard it at the store, we said it, we heard it on TikTok, and we're saying it now. But what's the real impact of what you're saying is a huge piece of the puzzle, is really reflecting on your language and your words and kind of digging into that a little bit, which can be hard. Is hard.
No, it's a great. It is hard because it's all about developing that awareness about things that we didn't think about, and so having to really become aware of what we say and the intent behind what we say and the impact of what we say. That's a lot of work, and so we also need to. My encouragement with parents is that when they're working on that is to give themselves a lot of grace and be patient with them, not feel like, okay, it's another milestone that they have to achieve by the end of the month, or they won't be parents, or because that's just going to make things worse.
Because the good news and the bad news is that there is no mountaintop anyway. You never, arrive. So, you're fine. You have time. So in our last 10 minutes here, I want us to touch on this piece, because I feel like it's a big piece that so many of us struggle with, us included, about how can we support our kiddos, students, or our personal children in healthy ways, like what you're saying here and all of that, without just setting ourselves aside, because that's very common. And I saw a quote this morning that made me think about our conversation today. And it said, there's a difference between sacrificing and being a sacrifice. And I was like, ooh, I feel like that is so often that we mix those two things up. Like, we're going to sacrifice for our kids, or are we being the sacrifice for our kids? And how can we kind of find that middle ground in there?
No, it's a great topic, and I can't believe it's already 3:21. I mean,
I know.
We've been talking for 10 minutes, but so
I know it always, every time.
For the sake of this, of our conversation, of the time that we have left, and being more of a broad discussion, obviously, because we don't have a specific example to focus on. But so I'll be broad, but. One angle that I often like to use to approach the situation is from modeling, and so if the parents are feeling guilty about taking time for themselves and carving out that time and doing things for themselves, I always encourage them to do it for their children, which can be very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
How will the children learn about taking care of themselves? And how will they learn about mental health and what it means to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, if they see their own parents do it?
Yeah.
So
that's a big question.
Right. And so, it's, we can go to the overused analogy of the oxygen mask. If having pressure drops, you put on the parents first, not on the child. So every parent knows that, but at the same time, it's hard to integrate that on a daily basis through different, through activities and through. So it goes back to, some of it is mindset, some of it is boundaries, some of it is, being able to put it all together on a daily basis and looking at, what's really important to you, because, different parents will have different resilience level, where they will have different needs, different sensory needs, different anxiety levels, different, different support systems. Single parent will have different needs than a two-parent family, and but looking at, okay, how can you model to your child the importance of taking time for yourself, to care for yourself emotionally, and why is that important, and what happens if you don't model that? How will your child learn that? Will they have to learn when they get in their 40s and 50s, because they're running themselves down and they're just, and things are falling apart, and it just really stress? What if they could learn it from day one, and through modeling? And so it could be something as simple as, sometimes I'll work with parents on the fact that a child may not like to play by themselves, and they always want to play with an adult. Yeah. And they really, just don't do well being by themselves. So we'll start with, and parents will say, well, we tried everything and it just doesn't work. They're just refusing. Right. Okay, so we're gonna do it in very, very small increments. Could they do it for 1 minute?
Let them start experiencing some success.
Okay, we're gonna start. How can we build them up for success? How can we set it up? It could be, whether we need a timer or whether we need any way to make it fun, to make sure it's an activity that the child enjoys, and then we at the end, they say, hey, I noticed that was really helpful because I needed to do XYZ and you were playing by yourself. I love that. That was really great. That really helped me, and then we slowly extend it. So that, that's one very simple, concrete way of slowly showing the child that parents have also needs on their own. Right. And that the child needs to find also ways to keep themselves busy and entertained during that time. So, and again, it's going to be different with every family in terms, but first is, reflecting on that notion of it is essential, it is important. And if you're willing to sacrifice it for yourself, what's the impact going to be on your child, that being able to learn from?
Because you're modeling behavior, whether you think you are or not.
Yeah, 100% of the
so
time.
I think you would definitely want to intentionally model your chosen behavior rather than just your reactive behavior. And I think another simple one to kind of throw out there is, because I think when we start talking about modeling self-care, a lot of our minds go to, well, I don't have time to, take a bubble bath or do a meditation or whatever. It can be so much smaller than that. So one example that I was having in a conversation recently was being able, this depends on the age of your child and all those things, but being able to close your bedroom door, right? And then say, hey, I need some time. Maybe you have something going on or you're changing, right? There could be all these things. And I was talking to a mom and I was like, you are allowed to close your door and let your child know, hey, I'm going to be changing. So I'm going to close my door. I'll be back out in about 10 minutes or so. And the kind of like, wait, I'm allowed to do that? And I was like, yes. So that is self-care. Yes. That is you giving yourself that boundary and that space of, hey, I'm going to be in here. My door's going to be closed. And we were having a follow-up conversation and she was saying, he just keeps knocking at my door. Knock, 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 knock. And I'm like, you can hold that boundary. But what if he needs me? And then you're able to have that conversation of, listen, I've told you that I'm going to be in here about 10 minutes. So unless there's an emergency, here's what an emergency looks like. I believe that you're going to be okay and you won't need to knock on my door and I'll be out back here in 10 minutes. And that, you've seen all the memes and the gifs of moms in the bathroom with all the kids on the doors, right? Just saying, I'm closing the door, I will be out in 10 minutes is beautiful self-care.
It is. Absolutely.
And easy. It's an easy one. Do it today.
And I'm glad you made that point about the bubble bath and the meditation and all that stuff, because I think that's often what the myth is. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I don't have time to go to the spa, or I don't have time to get
right.
And it's there's so much more on a daily basis. Just being able to tell your child, say, I've had a rough day, and I'm feeling frazzled, I'm feeling stressed. Kids get stressed, parents get stressed, and right now, mommy's stressed, daddy's stressed, and so I'm going to, for like the next 10 minutes, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. I'm going to, whatever it is, I'm going to go for a walk, and I'm going to, because that models, it's going to help the child internalize those concepts that, so when I get stressed, I can do certain things to, help myself.
Right. Because if you just keep pushing, you're going to feel that feeling sooner or later. And I think going back to, this is a big one for me in all of this conversation. I think the biggest part of it is okay and necessary and healthy to have boundaries with your child. And for your child to have boundaries with you, that's a different conversation. But that is so important to be able to say, like, listen, I need this time, or I'm going to close my door, or I'm going to bed, you're going to bed, right? Those types of things, it is okay. And it is important for them and for you. And it's so often that moms, I think especially, but dads too, all parents can be like, wait, I can tell them that I don't want to, sit and watch Teletubbies. I don't know what's big right now. Teletubbies with them right now? Yes. Yes, you can.
Yes, absolutely. Great point.
So I have loved this conversation. I feel like we could just keep going down
all day.
I think several times we've said that's a different conversation, but we could just keep going down all those pieces. And I love it. And I feel like our mission and our kind of what lights us up is very similar for you and I. And so much of what I was doing as an educator, the reason that I kind of took a big shift into one-on-one coaching with other adults was, I think, similar to why you switched to what you're doing, because it was, in order to best serve the child, we have to be healthy and aware. And what does that look like for us? And then we can model that and pass that on. And so if we're starting a generation back, instead of, trying to, there's a quote, and I don't know who it's by, I'm probably going to rip it apart, but it's essentially, if we can, instead of just trying to pull people out of the river who are drowning, can we find where they're falling in? And that was a big thing for me. If I can start working with adults and parents who are impacting the lives of the next generation, can we get to it before there are adults and parents who need to have that same conversation? I think that's very similar to what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think we speak a lot of the same language. So.
We do. We totally do. So tell us where people can find you. How do they get connected with you, and all of that?
So for all my LinkedIn people, if you're on LinkedIn, this is where I hide. This is who I am when I'm not working directly with clients. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I post every day. And so if you're on LinkedIn, direct message me. There's no particular protocol. Just shoot me a message and I'll be glad to chat with you. If you're not on LinkedIn, probably the best way is to go through my website. You can my email is on my website. My phone number is on my website. There's a way to set up a complimentary discovery session through the website. So, but even just chatting, you can always shoot me an email. And the website is lifeguidecoaching.org. Lifeguidecoaching.org. So yeah. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Chelsea. This has been great.
Yeah, I've loved it. How was your first podcast experience? Nothing went wrong?
I wonder who else is going to invite me now.
I mean, you could just take off from here. But honestly, it was a lovely conversation. We use all the same words. And I mean, I felt that way when we first connected, like, oh, we use the same words. That's so exciting. So I definitely recommend anybody here now watching on the replay, catching this 6 months later, wherever you are, connect with Christian, at least follow him. I mean, on LinkedIn, I love your posts because they always, even though we speak the same words, I read your posts and it's kind of like, they kind of cause me to take a minute and think, and that's always valuable. So thank you for the work that you do. And I love it. I think it's super impactful. So thank you for that.
Same to you, Chelsea. So thank you for putting this podcast together and spreading the words and helping people to get a voice and get their message out. So it's great.
Yeah, I love it. Well, y'all, thanks for hanging out with us. I'll see you next week on What Could Go Wrong Live. Same time, same place. New guest who I can't remember at this time, but it's going to be great. So thanks again, Christian. And we will see all of y'all next week. Have a good one.